Good day everyone, my name's Leigh and I'm a professional poker player from Melbourne, Australia, and recently I've just wrapped up my first 100,000 hands of online 9max 100NL games, and we're going to see what my win rate is today. How does it compare to my 200NL 6max win rate? Was it worthwhile making the switch over? We're going to get into all of that today. Before we do though, I didn't make a vlog last week, and there's actually a reason why. I did come down with a bit of a cold, and don't worry, I got tested. I don't have corona. I just had a regular cold and took some time off to repair from it. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't make a vlog. I sort of invested all of the energy I did have into playing poker, and I'm glad I did because I'm feeling a lot better having taken some time off, and we did get over the 100,000 hand mark for these 9max games. But we played a bunch of interesting hands over the period of last week when I was sick, and we're going to delve into the analysis of those today, including one solved hand. We've cracked open GTO Plus again, and we've run the hand in the simulator, so it's going to be interesting to see how my play was different from the equilibrium play, and what we can learn from figuring out what the Nash equilibrium was. So, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff to get to in today's vlog, so let's not waste any more time and get into the first hand history. So we start things off the way any good session should start off, with my favourite hand in all of poker, pocket aces. I'm under the gun, I go ahead and make it 3. Then a loose passive player in +1 throws in the call, as does a tight aggressive big blind. So we go 3 ways to a flop of 755 rainbow. Big blind checks it over to me. Normally I actually think this might be a good spot to go ahead and check it over to a field caller, just because a field caller is going to have a lot of strong hands on this board, mostly overpairs, stuff like 7-6 suited, that they're going to go ahead and bet themselves, and then we can either look to call and trap or mix in a check raise for value. But I think the dynamics are a bit different, just because this +1 player is more of a loose passive player. I think they're going to call actually pretty wide. Like, even if they have a hand like Jack 10 with a backdoor flush draw or something, like, I cannot see this opponent getting away from something like that. I think it's a good spot to make some EV by betting into them. I go ahead and make it 7, sizing up as well, since they're doing it so often in my opinion. And what do you know, they throw in the call and the big blind folds. So it heads up to a turn, which is the 4 of spades, and I think it's a similar situation to what it was on the previous street. I think my opponent is going to call with a lot of their strong 1-pair hands. I do think they'll start to fold stuff like, Jack 10 hearts now, or at least you'd think they would. There is some merit to checking it over to induce bluffs from those hands, but because my opponent is so passive, I think just keep it simple, bet into them. I go ahead and make it 15, which I honestly think I could size up a bit. It's going to be not much elasticity between like 15 and 22, for example. So maybe missed a bit of value there by not betting bigger, but my opponent does throw in the call, which we're very happy with. We're even more happy when the river is the 5 of hearts, which gives us a full house, but it also means my opponent has a lot of full houses in their range. So now we have to decide on a bet sizing. I really do think we have 2 options. I could bet something like 45-ish, a bit under the size of the pot, just to ensure I get called by like pocket 8s. But to be honest, against a loose passive opponent, I think you might be missing a bit of value by betting down that small. I actually think this is a great spot to overbet. I really think it's likely my opponent has a strong 7 or pocket 8s or better, and I cannot see a loose passive opponent ever getting away from those hands. So I really can just maximize value by bombing it here, going with a big overbet, which is what I decide to do in game. I go ahead and bet 69, and then my opponent hits the tank for about 5 seconds before throwing in the call. So that's beautiful news for us. We know if we're not getting raised on this board, we're good. If we did get raised on this board, I mean, that's a pretty shit situation, to be honest, but didn't happen here. We got a call, and we're going to scoop in this pot. Happy way to start the week. Next up, I have Jack 8 offsuit on the button. I go ahead and raise it up to 3, and then a tight aggressive small blind goes ahead and 3-bets it to 9. I wouldn't fault anyone for just going ahead and folding a hand as strong as Jack 8 to a 3-bet, particularly against a tight aggressive opponent who likely has a strong range of hands that they're 3-betting. But I actually do think calling is the best play here for 3 main reasons. The first main reason is my opponent bet really, really small, and we're getting a great price to see a flop. 2, we have position, which is even more incentive to call. And 3, we're almost 150 big blinds effective with the opponent, so it's going to be plenty of room to maneuver post-flop and play some poker. So I do decide to throw in the call here. Hop in the comments below and let me know what you would do in this spot. Do you like calling with these hands when you're getting such a good price? Let me know. So we see the flop, which is Queen 8-5 rainbow. The opponent checks it over to me. The reasons I would check back is just I do think my opponent could potentially be trapping with a lot of strong hands, like anything that's ace queen or stronger. I do actually kind of prefer betting, and it's just because I don't think a tight aggressive opponent is going to like ever check raise with those hands. Like I think mostly they're just going to check call with them. If we do bet and get called, we have a pretty easy check on the turn, which is going to give us a great opportunity to realize 2 streets of equity. Additionally, we can get called by some ace high hands, like if my opponent has, you know, ace jack suited, ace king offsuit. So I do decide to bet at it. I go ahead and make it 8, and then my opponent does throw in the call. We're off to the turn, which is the king of clubs. No help for us. Actually a pretty bad card for us because we lose to ace king now. When the opponent goes ahead and checks it over to me, we're going to stick with the plan and check back on the turn. So we're off to the river, which is the 10 of spades. Then my opponent goes ahead and bets out 23 and a third. I just want to say straight off the bat, not calling here with this hand. I think the chances that my opponent has ace king or pocket aces that they're betting for value is very, very likely. They also do have a few really strong hands in their range. Pocket kings is somewhat likely. So yeah, there's just no chance I'm going to hero call with this hand. Folding, completely fine option. But I actually think with this hand, it's actually a great spot to bluff raise. It's 1, we know we're behind. 2, we actually block ace jack. I actually think my opponent's range is going to be kind of filtered out of having ace jack, since I think sometimes that hand will just c-bet. I think sometimes that hand will just fold to a bet on the flop. So I don't really think they have many ace jack combinations in their range anyway. And the thing is, we're actually going to have a few of those. You know, we just bet at the flop just cause, and the turn was bad for our range, so we just check it back. Like, we can very credibly represent ace jack, jack 9, same story. Could have also like rivered pocket 10s or king 10. So if we raise here, it's going to put our opponent in a nightmare spot with all of their ace kings, all of their pocket aces. So I just think it's a good spot to go for it. And that's what I did. I went ahead and put my opponent all in, and the action's on them, and they're in the tank for about 5 seconds before throwing in the fold. Woo! Loving that result on this one. Yeah, very likely that they did have ace king or pocket aces. So absolutely beaming, we got away with this one. Next up, we get a raise from a loose aggressive early position player to 3, and the action gets to me in the cutoff with ace king offsuit. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 12, then the action gets back to the loose aggressive opponent, and they stay loose aggressive. They mix in the 4-bet, they go ahead and make it 37.5, and this is already a pretty awkward spot. I really don't want to go ahead and 5-bet this hand. If we 5-bet here, we're probably just going to get it all in pre-flop. Getting ace king offsuit all in pre-flop is pretty gross for 200 big blinds. I could potentially see going ahead and just folding here. If I was against a tight aggressive opponent, this opponent is one of those tighter guys. He can definitely have 4-bet bluffs. I do think that leaves us with one good option, and that's throwing in the call. So that's what I do here. So we're off to a flop. 6-3-3 with 2 clubs. The action's back on the 4-better, and they mix in a c-bet. They go ahead and bet 45.5, which is actually like a massive c-bet in a 4-bet pot. They're representing a lot of strength with this bet. They're basically saying I have kings or aces here, so when the action's on me, definitely could see merit to just going ahead and folding. But the thing is, this is a loose aggressive opponent, and I do think they might bet really big here with a bluff because they know it looks so strong, and we do have showdown value with ace high. We beat all of those 4-bet bluffs, ace 5 suited, the 10-9 suited. You know, some of their 10-9 suiteds have flush draws and backdoor flush draws. Could see merit to going either way. I do decide to throw in the call here. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you would do. So off to the turn, it's the 2 of spades. The action's back on the opponent. They go ahead and bet 111, effectively putting me all in. Now they're really putting us to the test, and we have to look at the situation and consider what hands does my opponent have here. And they can definitely have pocket aces or pocket kings. I still think they have a bunch of bluffs on this turn, because this turn is actually great if my opponent does have ace 4 suited or ace 5 suited. They turn to gut shot now. So the hand has so much more equity, and like, of course, if they took the 4-bet line with that pre-flop, they're going to barrel off on this turn card. So if my opponent has all the aces and all the kings, that's 6 combinations of value, but I think they're going to bluff with all of their ace 5 suited and ace 4 suiteds on this turn card. You know, maybe they don't always 4-bet some of them pre-flop, but like, even if they only do it with 4 combinations of those, we're still getting the right price to call against that range. And then consider, you know, they could be doing this with like 10-9 of clubs. I actually think this is a plus EV decision to, well, not call, we're going to raise them slightly to get them all in, but I think that's the right play if I'm ranging my opponent correctly. And in game, I went with my read and I put them all in. They go ahead and call off. And then the river's a 5 of hearts, which is an awful river for us. We lose to ace 4 and ace 5 now. So we're really just hoping my opponent didn't have ace 4, ace 5, aces, kings. Hoping they just have some random like 10-9 or something. And then we see what they had. Queen 10 of hearts. So absolute airball bluff. Absolutely stoked that I went with my read on this opponent because they were going crazy trying to push me around. But you can't push around a call station who can't let go of ace high. I really, really like this next hand we're about to go over. What we went over in my previous vlog when we used the solver, it really does inform how I played this hand. Going over these sims and making these vlogs, it really does help me grow as a poker player, and you'll see the line that we take in this hand is heavily informed by that previous vlog. So if you haven't checked out that previous vlog, make sure you go ahead and check it, link in the description. So the action's on me under the gun with pocket queens. I go ahead and raise it up to 3, and then we get a call from the +1 player. Then the action's on the low jack, and they a tight aggressive player who goes ahead and 3-bets it to 13.5. The action gets back to me, and the reasons I would like 4-betting are mainly just to try and get out this loose passive opponent, get heads up with the tight aggressive opponent, but an early position with a 3-bet dynamic, this is going to be a really, really tight range of hands, and I definitely want to call with some strong hands to protect my range, partly play a bit of pot control as well against a tight aggressive opponent who likely has a very strong hand themselves. So I do throw in the call, which might be a bit of a mistake. It's pretty close though. I throw it in, and then the opponent between us throws in the fold. So we're heads up to a flop. There's a banger flop if I ever saw one. We flop a set on ace queen 7. I go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor. They go ahead and bet 10.25. This is where the hand starts to get even more interesting. We could go ahead and check raise here for value, or we could just throw in the call. The reasons I would check raise are basically to try and get more value from the ace-x hands, which my opponent likely has a lot of in their range. But I think the superior play is just calling here. It goes back to what we saw in the solver, just flatting here with a lot of our range. It's going to keep inducing bets, and if we just call here, it gives us strong hands in our range that we can just plan on calling down with, which is also good because this is a board where my opponent is probably going to keep barreling with a lot of their bluffs, and we definitely want to induce that as well. So I just throw in the call, and then we're off to the turn, which is the 2 of hearts. The action's on me. I check it over to the villain. They keep betting. They go ahead and make a 40, so really big bet. Now we have the exact same decision we had on the flop. We could just throw in the call here. We could also rip it all in to try and put max pressure on ace-king, but I think that will be a bit of a mistake. A tight aggressive opponent, I think when they get check raised on this turn, they might call it with ace-king, but I think more than often they're probably going to go ahead and fold hands like that. I really think the best play here is to just call and see if my opponent does mix in a value bet with those ace-king hands on the river, or if they keep bluffing off, which is another important reason for us to, keep our call down range strong, to have some really strong hands like pocket queens in it. Our opponent can easily bluff 3 streets on a board like this, and if we call down with queens, we're always going to get value every time my opponent does bluff off. So I do throw in the call here. Hop in the comments below. Is that too tight? Should I be raising it up for value? Let me know. So we're off to the river. The river is the 8 of clubs. We could just lead out, all in for value here. I kind of don't like that though. I really think we're going to lose a lot of AV when our opponent would have bluffed off on the river with some of the hands in their range. Plus, tight aggressive opponent, definitely possible they could hero fold ace-king here. So I'd check it over to them. Then they go ahead and rip it all in, and we have a pretty easy decision to call off here. I throw in the call. Then we get to see what the opponent had. Pocket aces, so pretty sick cooler to get set over set in the 3-bet pot, and then they get us for stacks. But let me know what you think about my line. My line was heavily informed by what the solver said you should do in spots like this, and I did want to keep my call down range with a bunch of really strong hands in it. Basically, this is the effective nuts relative to what our range is. So hop in the comments below, let me know what you think of my line here. So we've got one last hand to go over before we get into my win rate, and this is actually the hand that I did run the sim on, so hopefully we're going to be able to learn a lot from this hand. So the action's on me under the gun with pocket 10s. I go ahead and open it up to 3, and the action gets to a tight aggressive player in the hijack. They decide to just call, and then we go heads up to the flop with them. So this is basically my range as the pre-flop aggressor under the gun. Got some of the hands in here, a low frequency, and a lot of the stuff that I'm just going to always be opening under the gun. And over here we have the cold callers range, and I think the most interesting thing to note about a cold calling range is it's always going to be pretty condensed, particularly from a tight aggressive player. Like I think a tight aggressive player is always going to go ahead and 3-bet ace king and pocket queens plus, but they're going to be throwing in a lot of calls with like pocket pairs and suited aces, Broadway type stuff that's sort of like it's too weak to 3-bet in their opinion, but they don't want to go ahead and fold it because it is a strong hand. I try to not play like this myself against clear opponents I think do have a good understanding of the dynamics of a hand. I don't really want to play a face-up range. There definitely is going to be some EV made from having a cold calling range, but typically it's going to be against opponents who make really silly mistakes post-flop. And I mean, I definitely do make silly mistakes post-flop sometimes. I'm just really not going to try to be doing this against other regs, but that's my strategy. Clearly this opponent disagrees, so let's go to the post-flop and see what happens. So the flop is a banger. It is ace-jack 10 with 2 diamonds. Now the action's on me, and I definitely do want to have some type of a betting range on this board. We're definitely going to have a few combinations of the nuts, but I do want to have a pretty robust checking range as well, just because a lot of my hands aren't really going to want to shovel money into the pot, like if I have ace king or ace queen. The thing is, when my opponent does have that condensed range that they call with pre-flop, they're going to have so many strong hands on this board that a lot of my range really doesn't like facing raises. It does make sense to play it a bit more cautious and have some strong hands in your checking range, and I decided to do that in this instance with pocket tens, and then my opponent checks back as well. If you guide your attention to the top left corner here, this is what my strategy should be in terms of frequencies of betting, and as you can see here, I am checking 72% of the time, or at least I should be, at equilibrium, and I definitely do have a betting range. As you can see here with the blue, it's going to be pretty mixed in terms of what types of hand we're using. We are going to be using some combinations of the nuts, but a lot of the combinations of nuts we have as well are checking, and pocket tens, what I specifically had, is a hand we're going to be betting sometimes, but checking it a lot as well. I think it just, like, my reasoning for why I did check on the flop does hold water, and you can see they are mixing in lots of checks, even with the really strong hands. They're actually betting ace king and ace queen more than I sort of assumed. That's what my strategy should be at equilibrium, and I'm pretty happy that I did go with the check in game because it seems like that's the right thing to do. Then my opponent goes ahead and checks themselves, and this is their checking range, and as you can see, still has plenty of strong hands. They still have combinations of the nuts that they're going to check, 2-pair type stuff as well. Even at a pretty high frequency, they're going to be checking the nuts. Like half of their king queen off are going to be checking here, so solver just plays it cautious from both positions in the hand, which is pretty interesting to note. So the turn is the 2 of diamonds completing the front door flush draw. The action's on me, and I absolutely think I have to bet this hand now. My opponent's going to have a lot of those pocket pairs in their range, and if any of those pocket pairs have a diamond, I think they're going to be tempted to call. Plus, I wouldn't have assumed this, that my opponent would actually have like some strong checks here, like ace 10 and ace jack I thought would always bet. And maybe this opponent would always bet those, but as we saw in the sim, a lot of those hands are meant to check at equilibrium. So we can, it's just more incentive to bet big, in my opinion. It's just more hands we can get value from. So I go ahead and make it 7, and then my opponent throws in the call. So we can see that the sim absolutely hates my bet sizing. They're basically never betting this size. If they do bet, they like using a smaller size, about a third of the pot here, and still checking a bunch of strong hands. Doing that with a lot of the strong 2-pair hands, the ace-x hands. You can see pocket tens is betting here. Is mostly betting, but it is using a smaller size, so that's definitely a mistake on my part. I suppose that sim does take into account that my opponent's checking range on the flop does have a lot of strong hands in it themselves. I was surprised by, but it does make sense that they would be a bit more cautious and use a smaller sizing and a lot of checks as well, when my opponent could potentially have the nuts here a lot. They could potentially have 2-pair or even a straight, which is something I definitely wouldn't have assumed, but glad we checked the sim because that is interesting to note. I did go ahead and bet. In terms of hands that they are calling with, they definitely still have a lot of king queen, the straights. They don't have a lot of flushes here. Flushes are going to go ahead and raise. As you can see, They do have a pretty small raising frequency, but most of those hands are just made flushes. Yeah, straights aren't ever really raising. Sets are raising sometimes, but yeah. So it's mostly when they do call, it's top pair hands and stuff that does have a flush draw, like these pocket pairs with a diamond, for instance. So off to the river. Ace of diamonds. Boom. This is a magnificent river. Not only do we make a full house, my opponent's actually going to have a lot of flushes in their range now that the 4-card diamonds is out there. So it's a very interesting decision what we want to do on this straight. In game, I decided to check it over just basically to induce bets from those flushes in my opponent's range. Check it over to induce bluffs potentially. That was my thinking at the time. Let's hop into the solver. I gave it a few different options on how I could play this spot, so curious to see what it says. Let's hop into it. So here are the options that I gave the sim. I did give it the option to go ahead and mix in a massive overbet, which I thought might make sense doing with some of your full houses, but it doesn't take that option very often at all. It prefers going with like an 80% pot or a 1/3 pocket 10 specifically. It really does prefer using a 80% pot size bet, as we can see here. That's what the purple represents, and that's what it likes doing with this hand in particular. In terms of what it likes doing, so it does prefer betting that hand. It is almost never checking the pocket 10s. So there you go. So the sim definitely not keen at all with my check, but in game I did check it over, and then the actions on the opponent, who goes ahead and bets 1. So like literally the smallest bet they possibly could do. When the action's back on me, like no-brainer decision to go ahead and raise here for value with my pocket 10s. Let's hop over to the sim though and see what my opponent should be doing on the river. So once I've checked, my opponent should be going ahead and either they check with about half of their range and they bet 80% pot with about the other half of their range. The sim does not like using a very, very small size bet. Unfortunately for villain, it's what they do. They prefer either checking or betting large. Honestly, I think it's either going to be stuff that they're going for like really, really thin value with, mostly ace-x hands, like, you know, ace-9 of hearts, potentially, or they could be trying to induce a bluff with like a nut flush or maybe even a full house themselves. You know, pocket 2s is definitely a hand they could have. You know, they're not meant to be raising on that turn. A lot of the time, according to equilibrium play, you know, in-game it might be different, it might not. So when the action's back on me, if that was their thinking, they're probably going to call any size bet if they're trying to induce a bluff with a nut flush draw. So I really just like going for maximum value in this spot, which is what I did in game. I go ahead and put my opponent all in. So we do have a check raising range on the river for me as the out of position player, and it is mostly the blue range, and as you can see, it consists of full houses, some bluffs. We're not ever meant to take a check raise line with pocket 10s specifically, but with all the other full houses in our range, we're going to be check raising, as well as using some ace-x hands, the ace-3 suited, the ace-5 suited as a bluff here. So once I do rip it all in, my opponent is meant to call off with basically full houses themselves, king, jack of diamonds. Let's hop over to the river, see what my opponent did facing the check raise. They go ahead and throw in the call. We're loving that news, because we do get to see what they had, and it was king queen offsuit. So it looks like they did bet really small to induce a bluff from the second nut flush draw, and absolutely stoked they did. In game, checking worked out, but I do understand in terms of equilibrium play, pocket 10s is not a good full house to just check over on the river. You're better off betting out big, try and get max value from a flush. So there you go, those were the most interesting hands I played over the past week when I was feeling pretty ill. But now we're getting into the bit that everyone's been waiting for, not only for this video, but probably for the past few months or so. We're going to get into my win rate since moving down to the 9-handed 100 and L games. Let's get into it. So here it is, no more Excel spreadsheets. We've got Poker Tracker to do all the heavy lifting for us in terms of figuring this stuff out. And as you can see, I did play a total of 100,561 hands of the 9-handed 100 and L games. And Unfortunately, it did take me 5 months to do, since it's only like mid-December now, and I probably started, like late August, so probably even closer to 4 months to be honest. But still, having said that, unfortunate that it did take me this long. I do think I have been pretty lax with volume overall in terms of this period, which is pretty disappointing. I really think if I push myself to get the 1,500 each day and I stuck exclusively to the 9-handed games and stopped playing 6-max, stopped playing tournaments, I would have got here a lot faster. So pretty disappointed it took me that long. Speaking of disappointments, the total amount I made over the 100,000 hands was 4,881. And I did, in terms of my all-in equity, I did make 5,229. And all that basically means is that I ran a little bit bad in all-in pots, sort of getting in good and then losing a bit of value. I think this number is probably better off in terms of judging your overall win rate, in my opinion. Promise I'm not just being biased because the number's higher, but those all-in spots where you get ace-king against queens and then who cares who wins? It doesn't really say if you're a good poker player or not in terms of what your win rate should be, at least in my opinion. So that's how much I made, and in terms of big blind per 100, I did get to 5.2 per 100 if you take my all-in equity into account. So that was always my goal when I was playing 200 NL 6-max games, to get to that 5 big blinds per 100. I never quite got there when I was playing that, but I did get there in this game. Unfortunately, that still kind of sucks because we're playing much smaller stakes. There's going to be a lower hourly for me, which is disappointing. I did switch over to the 100 NL games because I thought the competition will be so much softer that I would be able to make over 10 big blinds per 100, but maybe a bit cocky, a bit overconfident in my own abilities, and I didn't quite get to that 10 big blind per 100 mark. But you know what? I'm happy that I'm a winning player, at least coming into this thing brand new for my first 100,000 hands. Walking away as a winner isn't a negligible accomplishment, so I do take a pride in it, but it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be in terms of my overall win rate. If we look at the graph over the course of the 100,000 hands, I actually was doing pretty well and was really well on track until about the 75,000-ish hand mark, and I had a bit of a downswing here and then have sort of broke even since then. So I was pretty happy around this mark, but then I think this is around the period where stuff in Victoria started to open up and I was sort of distracted, going out more, exhausting myself, working out at the gym and stuff. So I did start having a bit of downswing when all of that stuff started going on, and unfortunately it has affected my overall win rate. Bit of run bad as well, but I do have to take responsibility for the fact I was distracted by other things and wasn't playing my best, also wasn't putting in as much volume as well, which explains why it took me so long to get to 100,000 hands. So definitely a bunch of things I have to take responsibility for in terms of having a lower win rate, and it's really just been in the past 1.5 months or so, these past 25,000 hands, where things have gone off the rails a bit, and I've been losing since then. So overall, happy that I'm still a winner, but pretty concerned that the numbers are starting to decline in the past 25,000 hands. So just for comparison's interest, I've got up the YouTube video from when I went over my win rate at 200 NL 6-max after the 60,000 hands, and as you can see, it was 3.55 over the 100 big blinds, which is a lower number than I'm making at 100 NL. But the important thing to keep in mind is the 200 NL, it's higher stakes, and really to incorporate what my hourly rate's going to be, you're going to have to times this by 2 to make it the equivalent of the 100 NL games. And as you can see, I was doing better at 200 NL, and additionally, those games are harder, so I'm probably going to be improving more, playing against tougher competition. So when you start to think about it logically, I was doing a lot better at the 200 NL 6-max games than I have been at the 100 NL, and I actually think it's going to be a pretty logical, straightforward decision for me to move back to 200 NL. I'm clearly making more money there. I'm going to be improving more, playing against tougher competition. And now that I've got solvers and I'm studying more, I'm probably going to improve a lot faster. I might even have a bigger win rate than that 3.55. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I've gotten over cocky before and been burnt, so we'll see. But I definitely am going to be mixing in more of the 200 NL 6-max games. It's clearly a better game for me than these 9-max 100 NL games have been. So definitely look forward to more of that coming forward on the vlog. That's going to wrap up for today. Thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end of this vlog. I know it has been a really long one, so if you have made it to the end, that's going to help my channel analytics a whole bunch. retaining viewership for that long. So you are the absolute best. I really do appreciate if you've made it that far. If you have, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and leave a comment. We've got plenty of stuff to talk about from this vlog in terms of my win rate, in terms of all the different hands we ran over, what the sim says about that one hand. There's so much stuff to cover, I can't even think of it all. Just hop in the comments and let me know. Also, go follow me over on Instagram at Leigh Bets, posting a bunch of poker content on there. So go follow me over on there. That's going to wrap it up. I'm out of here. Peace.